Nothing like the smell of a late summer New York club crowd. Get the old blood pounding, is there? Well, it's a pleasure to be in Manhattan. Manhattan is my second most favorite island in the world, only because I live on Hawaii. And I feel more affinity to this island than to the other Hawaiian islands, which have various cultural extremes I'm not really capable of relating to. But you'll hear more about that. Anyway, it's great to be here. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I appreciate those literary trajectories so ably launched from this stage by Anais and Shirai. And what can I tell you? It's a pleasure to be here. I always feel when I come to wetlands that I'm like checking in with sort of my home base congregation. About 5 years ago, I moved out to Hawaii for the specific purpose of looking back at this scene and putting in a full-time effort to understand it. Of course, this tells you I didn't have a job. I still don't, but if you're a cultural commentator, who needs a job, right? The glory alone is sufficient to pave one's way. And I, probably like you, here at the end of the 20th century, having lived long enough to go at least once or twice around the block, I'm noticing that the strangeness is not receding. The strangeness seems to be accelerating. The theme of this evening is Logos meets Eros. Well, I don't know a lot about Eros. I do think if you smoke after sex, you're probably doing it too quickly. But otherwise, my expertise lies in another direction. I started out in psychedelic drugs, and people said it was a flight from reality. It still is a flight from reality, but I think reality is now a bit more scary than the drugs we used to fly from it so long ago. Is that the victory of the cultural meme, or is that just, I don't know, the yawning grave sort of opening ahead of us? I don't know. My thing is to be amazed at the world as given by nature, but ever more as we approach this millennial speed bump in our calendrical highway, to be amazed at people and about the direction that mass psychology seems to be taking. And since I assume everybody here is a shaper of this mass psychology and the extremely powerful media-based jobs that you all occupy, it might be worth talking about that a little bit tonight. As I see it, I spend all afternoon at MoMA, as I always do when I come to town. I know it's a thing, but I do it anyway. Worshiping at the altar of modernism. So relieved now that it's almost over. You know, because it's going to be bracketed in this century, the 20th century. It's almost over. There's very little left to run. A few I's to be dotted, a few codas to be played. But essentially, it's a done deal. And this end of the century psychology is a psychology of hysterical conclusionism and summation and to some degree a rhetoric of fear that we can never outdo ourselves. And I think it probably felt the same way 100 years ago. If you had been in Vienna in 1899 when Jugendstil was bursting at its seams and Freud was beginning to formulate his theories, and the Paris Air Show of 1905 was in the planning. There has always been this a sense of fatalistic and apocalyptic excitement at the end of the century, and always throughout a culture at the edge of its technologies. And to my mind, the most interesting technologies of the 20th century have all been communication technologies. And I extend that to LSD, DVD, HD TV, GHB, 5-methoxy DMT, all communication technologies for the purpose of transforming languages, transforming understanding. And now, it seems to me we've struck the main vein. I mean, maybe it's just that I live up on my mountain and once a year in pursuit of money journey to cities not like this. There are no cities like this, but the lesser lights to gather the gold. But I have this sense now of palpable acceleration, and it has many qualities. But the quality that fascinates me most is one I hadn't predicted, which is it's getting funnier. It's getting funnier because everybody's categories are disintegrating. And the cult of political correctness dictates that we never point out that other people don't make sense. So not making sense has become enshrined as a domain of cultural activity. And God knows, I mind that, you know. Somebody once said, actually it was the mushroom itself, it wasn't something like that. But somebody who happened to be a mushroom once said, what did they say? If you're not part of the problem, you're part of the solution. No. What was said was that culture is like the shock wave of eschatology. Nothing is unannounced. This is like a weird quality of experience. You can't learn this from physics or economics. Maybe you can learn it from economics. But nothing is unannounced. Everything is preceded by the shock wave of its coming. And so somehow the spreading zaniness of reality is part of the boundary dissolving qualities that are going to make up this new cultural mix of disembodied human beings, nanotechnologically maintained environments, dissolved self-definitions, people living at many levels at the same time, intelligence as kind of free-flowing, non-locatable resource that comes and goes as needed, prosthesis, implant, boundary dissolution. These things are usually presented as fairly terrifying, but in fact I think behind it all lurks, you know, the demons who do calisthenics in the angles of every room on this planet to keep it all from collapsing into a flat line. In other words, the thing which lies at the end of any epistemic investigation of what reality is surprise. Not religious awe, not that kind of astonishment, but actually like pie-in-the-face hysteria, food fights and falling anvils, explosions. This is what lies at the end of the epistemic enterprise. Why is that? Well, I think it has something to do with the fact that we are simply loaded monkeys, that our belief, you know, that we were proceeding as God's messengers or his research assistants was somehow ill-contrived, misbegotten. What we've shipped for is not a voyage of discovery. It's more like a ship of fools deal. It's something which Hieronymus Bosch or Peter Bruegel the Elder could appreciate. It's probably best summed up in the work of Groucho Marx, but unfortunately he can't be here tonight. So I exist in this matrix, as you exist in this matrix, making our way through our lives, our affairs, our careers, our disasters. And the thing that has struck me about it for some time, and don't bother telling me it's a symptom of serious mental meltdown. I know that. I've lived with it. But the thing that struck me for some time is the artificiality of everything. How it's like plotted, how it's like constructed, artificial. It can't be that this is the first iteration. This is not the first take. There have been many takes. The fingerprints of the editing suite are all over this scene. If you don't notice that, it must be because you take your life for granted. If you take your life for granted and you think it makes perfect sense that you're doing whatever you do, this isn't an issue for you. But for those of us who never thought that we would gaze on the things we've gazed upon, be the people we've become, see the things we've seen, the whole thing has this extravagant, Pynchonesque kind of efflorescence about it that rides right on the edge of insanity, dare we say. And the interesting thing is, I don't need drugs anymore. I need them to get away from this sense of everything opening into everything else. You know that thing that W.H. Auden said about how the glacier rattles in the cupboard, a desert sighs in the bed, and the crack in the teacup opens, a door to the land of the dead. Well, I first heard that maybe 30 or 40 years ago. He used to wander around this neighborhood, as you probably know. And then I thought it was about acid, because that's what I thought everything was about at that time. But now that I've replayed it to myself, I see that it's like an alchemical insight. It's the insight that everything gives way to everything else. Everything is connected. We know this cliche imported from Malibu and Santa Fe, but it's connected in a way that isn't really, I think, sensed there. Everything is connected in that it's emotionally accessible. This is what the Eros part of this thing means to me, if I'm to make any stab at it at all. When I was very young, I must have had a very non-traumatic upbringing, because I discovered early in life a stunning truth that's made my life very complicated in its wake, but that I still think is true. And it's that people are very easy to love. In fact, you can love anybody if you are not constrained by expectation, class, the momentum of history, race, gender, the whole thing. But for a child to make this discovery and recall it, stick with it, be able to mnemonically pull it up in such situations like this, I think is extraordinary. When I stand outside it, I don't draw any conclusion from it. It hasn't made me a nicer person. Don't try to buy me a drink based on it. Somebody said it loves mankind, loathes individual human beings. I don't loathe individual human beings, but I do enjoy things the further I stand back from them. This is the Hawaiian perspective, the motivation for being the hermit with the nightclub career. But I have not lost the thread. This is the thread. And what it's about, it's an effort to generalize, from one person's life to everybody's life. Because the only thing I really bring to the party is a lot of experience and then some ability to articulate it. And it's like it's not my story, it's not somebody else's story I tell, it's just the story. And this story is like the literary net of synchronistic connectivity that makes life something other than the laws of physics. Particles flinging themselves through nothingness, waves dying out in empty space. This isn't our experience of being. Our experience of being is meaning. That's my experience, and the meaning is not always pleasant or life-affirming or even exactly rationally apprehendable. Sometimes meaning is a palpable thing, like liquid being poured through cracking ice. Language moves ahead of its intent. It encloses its object and gives you almost a reverse casting of the thing intended. There are many ways for words to fit themselves over the contours of intentionality. So personality becomes an issue, because in the future, personality, if it exists at all, is going to be a very fluid, dynamic thing. One of our hang-ups is the idea that we come with one body, one mind, or one body and a mind split into two parts. All these are social fables, illusions. The fabric of reality is defined by whatever large numbers of people believe about it. And now, in the absence of an overarching metaphor that can claim everybody's allegiance, reality is actually fracturing. I've called it the balkanization of epistemology. I poke fun at the abductees and make jokes about pro bono proctologists from nearby star systems. But for all of that, what this fracturing means is permission to manifest opinion as art. That's really all there is. There is no truth that is different from opinion. There is nothing is secure. I mean, even mathematics, if you understand Kurt Gödel and people like this, even mathematics is an uncertain enterprise. Even common arithmetic is an uncertain enterprise. So, what are we left with? Well, I argued a couple of weeks ago with Sheldrake and Abraham about this. I said we have to look at our messengers. We have to look at the people who bring the news of the pro bono proctologists from nearby star systems, who bring the news of military establishments trading human body parts for fiber optic technology. We have to examine the messengers. Well, they quickly stomped on that and said, no, that won't work, because if you go back into the history of ideas, lots of screwballs have attained great success with their ideas. You don't want to look too hard at Newton or Wagner or Thomas Aquinas or anybody else. So the squirrel test or the fluff test is insufficient. Well, so then what are you left with? Well, basically a sense of humor and a battered sense of aesthetic, I think. Now, I don't know how loose-headed the heads in this town are. I rather suspect they're screwed more tightly than the situation further west. and screwed more loosely than the situation further east. But I'm telling you, as the world reforms itself in these islands of defined opinion, the only thing which is going to make sense is sense which is conferred. So it becomes like about beauty, I think. Beauty. Beauty is an easier to realize value than political correctness, bodhisattvic compassion. I mean, what are these things? Who knows? The rancorous debates start as soon as they're mentioned. Beauty is self-defined, perceived and understood without ambiguity. And beauty is the stuff that lies under the skin of our individual existences. You know, James Joyce said in Finnegan's Wake, he said, we sprout on the seamy side here in Moy Cane, meaning in the red light district of Dublin. But up in the Yen Prospector, you sprout all your worth and you woof your wings. Well, you don't have to go up in the Yen Prospector, because right here, right now is a good enough place to do this. Relevant to the enterprise of the future. Oh yeah, I know that if you don't learn from history, you're bound to repeat its errors. But the most important thing to learn from history is not to do it at all. You know, that it's a very bad idea, history. Look where it got us. The only way we can essentially redeem what history has done to us is carry the understanding that it wrought back into the enterprise of humans, of creating sane systems of education, of resource extraction, of healthcare and community value. If we don't carry the experience of history back into those domains, history will continue. I remember once when I was a fighting radical in the streets of Berkeley, and someone had let a banner down over the front of a building. It was a quote from Jean-Paul Sartre. It said, "Socialism will not be transcended until we transcend the conditions which created it." True. History, even more true. And at the moment, the dialogue about the transformation of the species and the integration of communication technology, biotechnology, all of this stuff, how it's going to work out, is in the hands of short-sighted, profiteering institutions that are not particularly interested in your welfare or my welfare. In fact, I don't know if you've noticed that nobody is particularly interested in your welfare or my welfare in terms of the intellectual environment of risk through which you move every day. I mean, the number of cons you're offered, the number of people who prey upon you, all of these things indicate that the culture has not yet realized the power of its own possibilities. How will it realize the power of its own possibilities? I'm, at this point, pretty fatalistic. Through time. I mean, I don't feel I have to be here tonight or you have to listen tonight for us to come around any kind of corner. The momentum now is inevitable. Now it's about each of us individually arranging the furniture of our own mind to deal with what has become inevitable. It wasn't inevitable, but the 20th century made it inevitable through the Holocaust, modernism, psychedelic drugs, syncopated music, the dislocation of time and space through media. All of that has now made this transformation inevitable. The human being adapted to the savannas of Africa of 120,000 years ago is just dragged forward. into the future by all of this. And if you can get through life without trauma, heartbreak, agony, murderous rage, fury, betrayal, etc., you're a better man or woman than I am, for sure. I don't think anybody can get through the narrow neck of, first of all, incarnation in a body, but more trying incarnation inside a historical society that is cannibalistic, low intentioned, and with values that are completely formed and modeled on the marketplace. So I think about all of this all the time, and I feel great change. I try to monitor it, especially in the realm of society and technology. Everything is redefined every 30 days, every 60 days, redefined toward some kind of singularity, some kind of extraordinary moment in the fractal pattern of historical unfoldment. You know, fractals are always repetitious, always low levels build to higher levels, but nevertheless, somehow intrinsically to the pattern, there comes a moment where there's an apotheosis, a breakthrough to a new level of understanding. And then whatever the old world was, it simply dissipates. It goes away. Not that there isn't political struggle, but that once the, call it karmic underpinnings of a historical position, especially an oppressive historical position, once those underpinnings are articulated, revealed, shown in the light of day, then the game cannot continue. And I feel like we are, interestingly, in this calendrical moment, we can experience the calendar's transformation, or we can use it as others are using it to put forward the idea that certain things are now obsolete, no longer to be practiced outside the confines of the 20th century, not part of the third millennium. And I'm thinking of fascism, sexism, racism, all the division-based consequences of old-style politics. And people say, well, where then do psychedelic drugs fit into all of this, or do they fit into it? Of course they fit into it, because the felt presence of experience, the reclaiming of the body, that's the critical political battleground. Your mind is now your own in some sense. It was a mistake. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. But the acceleration of psychedelic use in the 20th century, the explosive spread of the internet, in some sense, it's as though we have broken from the slaves' quarters and are already milling in the streets. But we don't yet have the power of the understanding to know where the centers of power are and how it is that they disempower and manipulate us. And that's because we haven't focused on the body. The body, and this, I suppose, then, is the thing which gives the Eros thing cogency. The body is the battleground for these various definitions of humanness, and Eros, representing the erotic celebration of diversity, is a terrifying specter to hold up in front of the ordered, constipated hierarchists who actually have the illusion that they own the enterprise. And nevertheless, this is what they're looking toward. This is what was made inevitable by their own rapaciousness in the past, that they painted us so quickly into a corner of resource extraction and disgust with media manipulation, that a breakout was was inevitable, had to come. You know, one of the things that has impressed me as I go through all of this is, well, my doctor brought it home to me, because he was saying to me as I buttoned up recently after an examination, he said, you know, in the 19th century, most people your age were dead. This is true. I'm 52 years, soon to be 52. Very few people statistically reach that level. And I think part of what's happening, and it's odd to address an audience so young on this matter, but here's something your parents may not be telling you. Culture is as a con is only good for about 35 years on average. I mean, some people are impressed with culture till they go to the grave at 90. Some people are thoroughly apprised of the fact that it's horse shit by the time they're 19. But the average person's experience with culture lasts about 35 or 40 years. In the past, that was enough. Most people then were ready to die without ever blowing their whistle on the game. What is happening here is we are living past the age, by the millions, living past the age where cultural values make any sense at all. They simply are, after, you know, the 10,000th piece of apple pie, the 16th Mercedes, the 500th, whatever, it's just seen to be intolerable, unbearable. You know, the agony that resides in matter that the surrealists were so prescient in insisting upon. So culture generally is an infantilizing process. And some French people have mentioned this, but they didn't really put it in a historical context, that this neotenizing trick, now so useful to advertising, to create youth-crazed values in everybody, it hastens the end of this culture game. It hastens the awakening of many people to the fact that the felt presence of immediate experience is not negotiable. It has no price. And yet this is what's taken from you when you go to the job, when you dress for the image, when you kiss up to the power establishment, when your time is turned into money. The felt presence of immediate experience is analogous to being enslaved. I mean, let's be frank about it. It is enslavement. Simply that the rules of the game have been changed. Of course, it's easy to say if you're unemployed like me. But on the other hand, I'm meeting my obligations somehow, always have, without ever truly working. And without ever putting my shoulder to the wheel for the man. Of course, I had to deal dope to do this. once I passed that, and it worked. Well, I could go on in this vein for some time, as you see. But the thoughts that I wanted to leave you with tonight on this, because I feel like I am checking in with, in some weird way, my peer group of, and maybe my most critical group as well, which is fine. We don't need any gurus here. We don't need any laying down of the law. Anybody who tells you they have a clue as to what's happening should be suspect for mental illness and delusions of grandeur. But the thought is, and I haven't said this yet, but this is the conclusion from all of this, is culture is an effort to satisfy this weird desire human beings have to close off experience, to live with closure, to force closure. I mean, that's why cultural trips are so bizarre, why they don't make sense to anybody but the Witoto or the Warani or the Americans or the Japanese. If you're not inside the culture, it seems crazy. The cultures don't make sense because they're not trying to make sense. What they're trying to do is produce closure, which then somehow makes a human being who is living in the light of closure a more manipulatable, a more malleable, a lesser thing. And so, if the experience of the 20th century didn't do it for you, if psychedelics didn't do it for you, I don't know what could do it for you. The message coming back at all of us is live without closure. That's the honest position, given that you are some kind of a talking monkey, some kind of a primate, some kind of creature on a planet, in an animal body, incarnate in a time and space. In the face of that, life without closure is the only kind of intellectual honesty there is. If you have to inoculate yourself against the various means of closure that are around, psychedelics do that. That's why they are so politically controversial and potent, because more than any other single act that you may voluntarily undertake, they pull the plug on the myth of cultural meaning. They show that these things are provisional, and that beneath the level of culture, there is lurking this erotic, time and space bound, feeling defined, pre-linguistic mode of being, which is real being, not becoming, not caught in the various fetishistic forms of tension, the commodification of culture and delayed gratification and all these other buzzwords create, but a deeper level of authentic feeling. It was there all the time, but is denied by the culture. And if we don't come back to that, if we don't re-access that, then this historical thing, which grinds so many people down, none of whom are here tonight, I might add. They are lost in the barrios of third world cities and in the disruptive environments created by this system. But history will continue. I'm fond of quoting Stephen Gedulus, where he says, Joyce's character, where he says, history is the nightmare from which I am trying to awaken. But it's really, nightmare is not a strong enough metaphor. It's a narcoleptic paralysis. It's that horrible thing that happens at the edge of sleep. It's that place where the pro bono proctologists from other star systems get their wedge into the scene, And if you've never had that paralysis at the edge of sleep, you don't know the panic, the constriction that it engenders. We're really, at a very terminal point in the process of our historical unfoldment. In the same way that our hunter-gatherer phase led into agriculture and advanced role specialization and urbanization and all that, now we're ready to make another leap. But this time, it's going to be done in the light of consciousness, because consciousness is what was garnered in the last leap. And how this is done depends essentially on the collective state of mind, how malleable it is, how phobic of closure it is, how open to the logos, to the downloading of universal intent into human understanding, which is what I would call the logos. It is. And finally, how deeply it operates in the light of logos. How much love is there in this culture? How much love has been carried intact from the plains of Africa through the Minoan civilization and the medieval period and the spread of people around the planet, how much of what we call true humanness made the journey with us to this new time. We're going to find out. We're going to find out by pooling the love that is in each of us in a form in which it is coextensively shared by all of us. I mean, there may be many ways to talk about what this will feel like, what it will look like, but what it will be, if it works, is love. If it isn't love, then it's less than a perfect sublimation of the alchemical purpose, and less than perfect is now off the menu. So the only way up is out, up and out. That's all I have to say. Will surely describe as another meandering diatribe. I know there are some people here from the novelty list. It would be nice to have a flesh meet downstairs, and anybody else who wants to chat, and then we'll get out of here, and Olatunji is going to do percussion. And if that ain't the felt presence of immediate experience, I don't know. The thing last night, as I said at the beginning, but it may have been lost in the shuffle, is a kind of indulgence to me because it's a completely original idea, and like all original ideas, it runs a strong risk of being just simply wrong. But because what it seeks to do is so grandiose, and because it seems to do it to some degree, and then that, of course, falls upon the eye of the beholder to assess, it seems worth communicating. As an example, if you don't choose to believe it or take it to your heart, then as an example, what it can function for you as is a picture of the sorts of ideas that are out there, the kinds of insights that we can draw out. And people, always in these things, we discuss what could be done, what should be done, what can we do other than what we're doing to make that kind of a world come to be, or come closer to be. And my notion is simply art. As I think I told you at some point, the idea is not to confront bad ideas, but to come up with good ideas. Otherwise, your enemies define the game, and you are the loyal opposition. And, how many years have we been the loyal opposition, and hasn't it been an unsatisfying experience? So, I think every single one of us has immense inner resources, and the psychedelics confirm that. And by inner resources, I mean of intelligence and information and beauty. And I think we would be happier people, and this would be a better world if we spent more time bringing that out, rather than opposing somebody else's vision of what is happening. The I Ching says at one point, if evil is directly confronted and named, it perfects weapons to defend itself. It says in any direct confrontation with evil, you show it, you reflect too much of it back upon itself, and it learns to defend itself. And the strategy then is one of stealth, I think. And, beginning at least with, I don't know, it's just an art historical game, but let's say the pre-Raphaelites. There have been these waves of aesthetic and social dissent
I mentioned the pataphysics movement in France in the 1890s, Dada and Surrealism, and the abstract expressionists, and the Beats, and the hippies, and the punks. I mean, these different tones, different adumbrations, but always the same message, which is that satisfaction and completion can't be found within the official culture. And, I came up into that. I was born and raised in an incredibly conventional situation by very loving parents in a pleasant environment. And I just couldn't wait to break their hearts and get away to sin and the big cities and all of that. So the important message to take out of all of this, I think, for people in your position who may or may not wish to grapple with abstract mathematical models of time or trade with naked aboriginals in steaming jungles, what can you take into your own life? It seems to me what the whole thing, the tension between these bohemian countercultural critiques and bourgeois society is about, is what I call the primacy of direct experience. If you are inside a Christian world, or a capitalist world, or a Jewish world, or a Republican world, or a democratic world, these are worlds of ideas. These are ideas. And we can live by ideas, but we can't live by ideas alone. It creates megalomania. It creates unbalance. It creates a grotesque parody of what life is supposed to be about. And what life, I think, is supposed to be about is the reclamation of the primacy of direct experience. And that means sex and psychedelics and dancing and conversation and good eating and lots of exercise and travel and attention to what Wittgenstein called the present at hand. The present at hand, meaning what you can reach is what's real. And everything else, becomes progressively more hypothetical, more abstract. Anticipating Wittgenstein talking about our reach, William Blake said, "Attend the minute particulars." This was his advice for life. Attend the minute particulars. Well, that's good 18th century prose for pay attention to the details. Keep your eye on the ball. The nexus of mystery and of being and the theater of our drama of redemption is the body. The body. And we have been thoroughly weirded out on the subject of the body because we have been the inheritors of a very complex, head-oriented, abstraction-devoted social system, cultural theory. But we see the consequences of not feeling all around us. I mean, the toxification of the earth, the toleration of overpopulation, and the institutions that promote it is all achieved through a deadening of feeling. If we could feel what we are doing to the earth, to the elderly, to the young, two racial and social minorities, if we could feel the agony of what we do, we would stop doing it. But we have what we call reasons for why it is the way it is. Arguments, theories, blame, it's somebody else's fault, or the poor are always with us, or something else. But these are all evasions of the obligation to create a community based on love and tolerance. Hardly a radical notion, and yet incredibly difficult to bring into existence. And, perhaps the world will transform itself in 2012, and we need have no further concern about all these things. But perhaps not. We need to live our lives in the light of the assumption of an open future, not an absolutely free future, but not a determined future, an open future in which acts of human authentication, acts of human authenticity push forward the universal project of the conservation of novelty. Martin Heidegger, the German metaphysician, the way he got it together was he said what life is for is what he called care for the project of being. Care for the project of being. This is what we are called to. Again, Heidegger's phrase, we are called to care for the project of being. And that means an appreciation of the minute particulars, an appreciation and a recognition of difference, an appreciation and a recognition of our position in the cosmos, which is both insignificant and paradoxically grandiose at the same time. Pascal said, man is a reed bent by the wind, but he is a thinking reed. And that's the paradox of our being, our fragileness in nature, and yet the supernatural grandiosity that we sense in the hallways of our souls. And shamanism is not religion, really. At its fundamental level, it's the science of direct experience. Other forms of science may deal with the states of the quanta or the orbits of the Pleiades, but shamanism is the science of direct experience. And its laboratory is the human body and the human nexus in space and time. You're given, on average, 60, 70 years, and on average, 145 pounds of meat. And this is what you're dealt, the meat and the time. And then it's up to you, to sort this out and make of it what you will. And the entropic path, the downward path into blame, unhappiness, self-blocking, so forth and so on, that's always there. You can release yourself into the river of consequences and take no responsibility for who you are. But the higher stakes game, the more interesting game, is to see the whole thing as an opportunity. Heidegger, I'm amazed I'm quoting Heidegger so much this morning. Heidegger again, he said, the body is not a thing, nor is it a process, which is surprising because that's considered an advanced view, that it is a process. He said it is not a thing, nor is it a process. It is a window of opportunity which opens into eternity. It's a window of opportunity. But opportunity implies the non-exercise of itself. An opportunity is something which you must seize. It doesn't press itself upon you. It doesn't force itself upon you. It merely is there if you want to use it. And my approach to life and the whole Megillah is that it's like a puzzle. It's a mystery. It is a koan. And salvation occurs simultaneously through an act of love. That's not news, but here's news. Simultaneously through an act of love and an act of rational apprehension, understanding. Love without understanding is not the full story. Real love requires understanding. Rational apprehension is a kind of penetration of the beloved person, nation, ecosystem, whatever the beloved is. Understanding is the higher dispensation. And these psychedelics, which, in the 60s and 50s were simply called consciousness expanding drugs, good old phenomenological description. If there's an iota of possibility that they expand consciousness, then we must put our attention on this area, because it is the absence of consciousness that is making our situation so very uncomfortable. People going for the fast buck, people elbowing their neighbor and their neighbor's concerns out of the way, trampling over each other. Low consciousness activity is the problem. And as concerned people, as intelligent people, as people of wealth and leisure, and you may think you're scraping bottom, but the lowest among us here is still in the upper 5% of the elites of this planet, because you just don't get here any other way. So upon us devolves a certain responsibility, not only for ourselves, but, the average human being on this planet is a 23-year-old black woman with 2 children. A certain responsibility toward that concrescence of the human experience. So the thing I just want to leave you with is that though this has been very heady and egg-heady, which is how I am, we have talked ideas, but we have not laid out a method or a dogma or a program. There's nothing to sign up for. There's no higher level of initiation if you give me $1,500 or anything like that. What we have been celebrating here is an experience, and we haven't had the experience. We've just talked about it and analyzed it and anticipated it. But it is there to be had, out there in nature, with nothing between you and it. To steal from Van Morrison, no guru, no method, no teacher, just you and me and Mother Nature in the garden, wet with rain. And you may choose to hear this message, and then life will continue for you as it has with the tools you have in your toolkit. Or you can choose to go out there and meet it. But it's not an easy path, because it's the real path. And the fear is real, and the risk is real, and the reward is real. It's beyond hype, which is for us almost unimaginable, because everything comes clothed in flamboyant self-anticipation. And it's, in a sense, a secret, and yet, paradoxically, a secret which can be freely told of, as we've told of it here. But the human mind has an incredible capacity to turn away from challenge, opportunity, risk. So what I want to remind you is that we only circled around the mystery. We used our intellectual flashlights. We saw glimpses of it. But the real meat of this path is, alone in silent darkness on 5 grams or something. Plotinus, the great Neoplatonist philosopher of the Byzantine Empire and a great mystic, spoke of the mystical apotheosis as the flight of the alone to the alone. And I've always thought that was an excellent program for how to meet the psychedelic experience. It is a mystery. It is not an unsolved problem. It's a true mystery. And we are not accustomed to this. I've searched the world for mysteries, and I've found illusions, fraud, misunderstanding, obfuscation, impenetrable complexity, but never true mystery, except in this one tiny, tiny area of the chemical and biological world. And there, I guess because, in the greater plan, everything must exist, and so, therefore, must magic. But the doorway to it, the doorway into that world, is a very confined spot in the vast data field of this world. And you could miss it. Although I'm doing my best to make sure that doesn't happen. Where spiritual advancement is discussed, I want psychedelics to be discussed. Where transformative social visions are put forth, I want psychedelics to be part of the agenda. To me, the only thing you can compare it to is sexuality on one level, but it's different from sexuality because sexuality is written into the bones. Very few people can go from birth to the grave and escape it in some form, some confrontation. I mean, even the celibate monk, basically his life is a confrontation with sexuality in that form. The psychedelic experience is very different. You can go from birth to the grave and never even hear of it. And millions of people have. But they were, and I don't say this in a blaming sense, it's a tragedy. They were infantilized by their circumstances in time and space. They never experienced that dimension of freedom. It's like having an automobile and you drive it around and it seems to work fine, but there's this button on the dashboard and you never investigate to find out, what it does, what it is. And there is in us this switch which can only be thrown by forming, until the era of modern science very recently, could only be thrown by forming a relationship with a plant, with an entirely different order of being. And when that switch is thrown, this entire other dimension of humanness is revealed. And it is you can tell even if you've never been there, from the excited testimony, hysterical denunciations, and passionate defenses, that it is an area charged with meaning for the human experience. So I hope that this get-together inspires you to go further and go deeper. I think that there's no other game in town. Doing art without this in your experience is essentially like trying to do art without good light. Trying to live a life without the illumination of this experience is a far more difficult thing, because what do you have to guide you? The secular faiths, the religious faiths, and the obvious confusion that both have spread in their wake. Sexuality is a path to a kind of authenticity, but it has to be negotiated with another human being in a very careful and subtle dance of energy. This is not like that. This is something where there is a subtle dance of energy, but it's not with another human being. It's with, and then you can either think of it as a mushroom, or God, or the universe itself, or Gaia. It will take all those projections with equal ease. So somehow, each of you from different pasts and with different futures have come through this place where we were all cotangent for 4 days. And if you are not a psychedelic person, and you, through the fact of having been here, become one, then you will look back on this weekend as a primary turning point in your process of simply growing and growing up. And for those of you, if that happens to you, that is the satisfaction of my work. As I say, I don't think of myself as a guru. I think of myself as a doorman. And I'm very happy to see people pass into the 4-star experience that lies through the fogged and etched glass. And that's really all I have to say. I'll entertain loose-end questions, or if anybody wants to say anything, or whatever needs to be done, now we can do it. But thank you very, very much. And I look forward to seeing you all downstream, some sooner, some later, eventually at the general judgment, whether it occurs in 2012 or on some more extended scale, we will all stand in the same place. Yeah.
I had asked you once to give me your definition of the soul. I've heard many people try to define it, and I'd just like to hear your definition.
Yeah, well, it's a complicated thing. It has a long history, because there's the idea of spirit is in there, and so is the idea of intellect. And these spirit, soul, intellect, various philosophies have moved them around. I think of the soul as a kind of, well, you know how I think we can assume that we all have a pancreas, but probably no one here has ever seen their pancreas. Well, that's because it's in a place, it's in a dimension that's rarely revealed, i.e. within the confines of the tissue of your body. I think of the soul as a hyper-dimensional organ. It's an organ that you can't see, like the pancreas, but if you open up the body, you will see the pancreas. You won't see the soul. But if you were to rise up into a higher mathematical dimension, a human being would look like a worm, because the worm would extend from birth to death. All the intermediate states would be there. The entire lifetime would be perceived in a single moment. And that's how I think of the soul. The soul is not who you are now. The soul is who you are and will be and have been. So it's yourself extended in time. You know, Plato said time is the moving image of eternity. And what we were doing last night, in a way, was looking at snapshots of that moving image. I think that at death, if the soul survives, then in a sense what happens is you flow back through your entire life, and it exists all at once in a single moment. I mean, that's the paradox of hyperspace, that what is serially presented in Newtonian space is holistically apprehended in hyperspace. And similarly, there is a group soul, a group mind, and all the same processes apply. In a way, the transcendental object at the end of time is history. History, you know, I think I said, at least I think, that history is like a psychedelic experience. And we are building toward the apotheosis, the place where language fails, where the ego dissolves. You can no longer make sense of it. It's been getting weirder and weirder, and finally the speed at which the weirdness is accumulating just avalanches over you, and you can no longer make sense of it. But an idea which I didn't talk about very much in this workshop, but that's dear to my heart, is the idea of the philosopher's stone. In the 16th century in Europe, before the rise of modern science and chemical theory, the ontological distinction between world and self was not as strongly defined as it is in modern people. And consequently, people working with substances entered into a kind of participation mystique in which the contents of the unconscious were actually projected onto matter. And Carl Jung made much of this because he realized that these alchemical texts, which are so cryptic and bizarre, could be treated like dreams because they were downloads of unconscious material. But I think that the alchemists were, in a sense, on the right track, in that what is being sought in the concrescence, what the essence of the thing at the end of the world is it's a union of spirit and matter, is what it is. And it's a union of spirit and matter that occurs in such a way that each retains the characteristics that it brought into the union. In alchemical terms, this is called a coincidentia positorum. In modern terms, it's not allowed. It's a logical contradiction. But I think that the essence of understanding the world is to be able to hold a logical contradiction in your mind and not force things to be either or. And the philosopher's stone is the idea that you could have a kind of matter, I mean, think of it as a small pebble, which is yet somehow made of mind. And hence, is an object freely commandable in the imagination. And they sought this. They tried to make this. This was a technological agenda from 1540 up until the 30 Years' War. And the universal panacea, the panis supersubstantiales, all these terms for this lapis, this stone. And what it is it's a place in space and time where anything can happen. Anything can happen. So imagine that what we are involved in collectively, and each of us, is an effort to give birth to the soul, to somehow cause the soul to come into existence. One way of thinking about this, I think I said this earlier, but it probably means more now, is that the historical enterprise is an effort to turn the human body inside out so that the soul becomes visible and the body becomes a process that you can command in the imagination. Do you understand what that would look like? So then here's the comic book version of what I'm talking about. Here we have the Philosopher's Stone. I have just, by a cryptobiological process, regurgitated it into my hand, and here it is. Okay. So it's my soul objectified outside my body. It's a holographic matrix of space and time. When you look into it, you can see stars in there. And if you need to go somewhere, you stretch it out and sit on it, and it carries you there. And if you're hungry, you eat it. And if you need a shower, it becomes a levitating shower head above your head from which warm water pours. And if you need to know something, you ask it. And if you need to wear something, it becomes it. And what it is it's a union of matter and your imagination. And you say, well, such a thing could only happen in a dream. Well, quite right. I think we may be headed into a dream, either the after-death dream or the nano-cyber-technological dream or the pharmaco-shamanic dream. We are headed into some kind of a dream. We are going to live in the imagination. And the imagination is the domain of the soul. I mean, I'm not kidding. We are going to live in the imagination. It will cease to be metaphor. It will become real estate. That's how real the imagination is going to be. And it may be virtual reality, pharmacological reality, after-death reality, nanotech reality. We'll find a way. We will find a way. Because I think that this union of spirit and matter is an agenda in the human program that runs very, very deep. This is why we spoke for the first time. Language is a union of spirit and matter. The spirit of the thinking mind and the very ephemeral matter of the air, which can carry an acoustical signal. The Word is on its way to becoming flesh. Wasn't that the promise? And similarly, the flesh is on its way to becoming Word. That's what all that raving is all about. The language is a partial condensation of the Philosopher's Stone. So is a 747. It will carry you places. All technology is the effort to create ultimately the ultimate tool. The ultimate tool. And what can the ultimate tool do? And what is the ultimate tool for? The ultimate tool can do anything. obviously that's what the ultimate tool is. Well, now it's very interesting that we have arrived in the last 40 years or so into the realm of the cybernetic machine, because it has a different ontos than previous tools. I don't know how much you know about computers, but think of what all a computer is, even the most sophisticated of computers, is an enormous set of switches. And so here you have a machine with 50 million switches. Set the switches one way, and it will predict the weather. Set the switches another way, and it will give you a hell of a chess game. Set the switches another way, and it will balance your checkbook. The computer begins to look like the crudest approximation of the union of spirit and matter. And look at it. There it is. Gallium arsenide, silicon, gold, platinum. But what is flowing through it? Electrons. But these electrons flow according to the architectonic plans of thought. It's thought that flows in the computer, not its thought, our thought. We tell it what to think, and it thinks it. And as the computer shrinks, and as the data storage increases, more and more spirit is being stored in less and less matter. And, you know, we talked about virtual reality, we talked about implants that could create dream states, or maybe we didn't, but it was on my mind. All of these things. And so I think, you know, that through technology, we are taking our oldest intuitions, call it the intuition of the dream time, and creating it so that it is real. And the alchemical union, which was abandoned by early modern science, actually will reemerge as a reasonable scientific endeavor once the new sciences of information theory and chaos theory and complexity theory and so forth and so on are put in place. We are in a position to create the philosopher's stone. And, you know, it will not only carry you through space, it will carry you through time. I think that's what's going on at 2012. That technology, which appears to be just a secular concern of capitalism and scientific R&D, is in fact a sacred calling, and that the purpose of it is to mirror the mind of human beings through the perfection of the tool, and that the perfect tool, when it arrives, will end the historical process, which was the tool-making process, and it will end it by virtue of the fact that, among other features, the philosopher's stone allows you to move through time. And that's why that graph comes down to that place in 2012 and then can't be propagated any further, because it's a picture of a serial, linear society unfolding. And at that point, the serial, linear society becomes an anachronism. Yeah.
You were raised Catholic, and there's at the end there's always the sheep and the goats. And in the Quran it's the believers and the unbelievers. Do you see?
You mean who eats it?
Yeah.
Well, I have two impulses here. One is to say nobody eats it. That's just a bad fairy tale. But a lot of people, this is something that sometimes brings people clawing their way out of their seats to get at me. But it goes back to what I said earlier. I think redemption is an act of intellectual apprehension. And I had a professor when I went to college, Joe Tussman, and what he claimed was that intelligence is something that you can teach, that we have been entirely misled to think of intelligence as something innate that you're born with. And he was a teacher, and he seemed to make good on his premise. So what if evil exists, and I'm not sure it does, it is ignorance, which is a Hindu position, avidya, obscuring avidya, ignorance. So I think that there is an obligation to understand. I'm not putting aside the obligation to love and to feel, but those obligations seem to have their defenders everywhere. But there is an obligation to understand. And ignorance is ignorance. It's not a good thing. There's no way it is good to not know something. And one of the things that I come up against, and we had a humorous brush with it last night, is that this thing that I talk about, the time wave, requires a knowledge of history, a slight knowledge. Nobody has it. Nobody has it. And I go to Germany and I lecture this stuff, and when I first started going to Europe, I thought, oh, well, this will really be fun. These Europeans, it's a better educational system. They'll know what's up. They don't know what's up. I talk about Otto the Great. They can't place him within 500 years. Generally, the audiences, occasionally someone can. Well, amnesia is a pathology in the individual. If you have an individual who can't account for where they were in 1990, then you need to look into, what was it, a blow on the head, a long drunk? What happened to you? And yet in ourselves, we accept this weird, historyless thing. And it's going to bite us in the ass. It's a cliche to say those who don't learn from history are bound to repeat it. But that's all very fine if you're running around throwing spears and pulling catapults around. But if you have atom bombs, you can't be so stupid. So one of the things that that occurs to me is we human beings come equipped with something called the unconscious mind, discovered by Freud and Jung in Vienna, for us, but apparent throughout history, the unconscious mind. And part of this technological and historical crisis that we're in has to do with the fact that we can no longer afford this luxury. This is fine if you're, as I say, chipping flint or running around howling at the moon. Then you can have an unconscious mind. But a global civilization cannot have an irrational, an out-of-control component driving its social systems and social decisions. So part of what we all have to do is get smarter. And psychedelics, consciousness-expanding drugs, expand consciousness. And so do these technologies. And I think I said to you the little joke about how a computer is simply a drug that you can't swallow. In the future, that won't be true. I mean, the computers of the future will be the size of double-aught capsules, or smaller, and they probably will be taken internally and just insert themselves in your tissue and grow gold fibers into your brain systems and interact with you. Well, now, are we talking about a drug or a machine? And the answer is that biology is very machine-like at the microphysical level. You know, the genes are being read, the ribosomes are connecting the proteins together. The whole thing looks rather like a factory of moving mechanical parts. But the databases that are being created and the protocols for moving through them are permission to a new level of intelligence. The internet, I find, truly awesome. I mean, when you get in there, I start out from my home in Occidental, and then I ask a question which requires that the internet access the main computer at Shibuya University in southern Tokyo. We're there. If I'm not paying attention, I don't even realize that we are now talking to the university computer there. But then we need a certain image of a certain painting. Well, it turns on, it's online in a database at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. We're there. And in a session, you may move around the world 10 times. I have an automatic system on my computer at home that goes on in the middle of the night and has a series of key words programmed into it, things I'm interested in. And in the quiet hours of the night, my computer moves from one university data system to another, looking for files and downloading them into my system so that when I get up in the morning, I have these files on screen. I mean, I'm interested in a dying cult in Iran, a religion that's existed for a very long time but is now down to a few hundred people. Well, there's a scholar in Leipzig who is interested in this. There are some people at the UN. We carry on a little interest group. And there are even real Mandayans in our interest group, actual members of this dying religion. It's a special concern of mine, and I'm fairly confident I'm connected up to 90% of the people in the world who care about this, because so few do care. So you build these interest groups. You can expand your eccentricity. It's a tremendous permission for eccentricity and community, because you find the other eccentrics who are into the same weird subset of knowledge that you are. And then the other thing is general knowledge is much more accessible and available. Schools have not changed essentially in 200 years, and yet education is the thing which allows us to be democratic societies and to control our industrial policies and make informed decisions. Think of the change that has occurred in society in those 200 years, and people are still going to the little red schoolhouse and sitting at their desks. And I mean, yes, we have play group and, indirect lighting, but hardly the revolution that we're looking for. Anything else? I'm just rambling here.